The second row of my bookshelf includes middle grade, children's literature, and some illustrator works on the end. The first cube in this row is my middle grade fiction, and then the start of my children's literature. So first up I have Wonder by R.J. Palacio, which was, I mean, it lives up to the name. This was absolutely wonderful. It's a really unique narrative, and I think a lot of adults could benefit from reading this book. I definitely recommend it. I then have this My Story book, which will take a little bit of explaining. This one is A Tale of Two Families and is set in the mid-70s and is about the women's liberation movement. I have all of these My Story books from the Australian series, but this one really resonated with me, and it was sort of my first exposure to feminism, which is now something that's really important to me. So I like to keep this one out rather than in storage, just because it was so formative to me, to my personality and my political beliefs, that it's nice to have a reminder of where it all started. This is a short story collection, which we're just going to call Noisy Outlaws because I'm not going to read this entire title out. It's got short stories in it by a range of really interesting authors, and it made a really quick and easy read when I was reading it on a plane. Small Steps by Louis Sachar and Holes by Louis Sachar. It really annoys me that I have to have the first book after the second book, but height is more important. Cirque du Freak by Darren Chan, which genuinely really creeped me out, which is kind of embarrassing because it's meant for like 10-year-olds, but seriously, this thing had me sitting on the edge of my seat. It was awesome. Wildwood by Colin Malloy. Finding Violet Park by Jenny Valentine. The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster. This was so punny and wordy and hilarious. I read this year and I really wish I'd read it when I was a child because I think it would have become a firm favourite. And then I have my little collection of vintage children's books. I love vintage designs and I think their children's designs are just really, really sweet. The first one is I Captured the Castle by Dodie Smith. Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson. The Boy in Striped Pyjamas by John Boyne. Louisa May Alcott's Little Women. Black Beauty by Anna Sewell. And A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, which I read this year and despised, but I still think this cover is pretty much the cutest. Look at Scrooge's little worried face. With the exception of The Phantom Tollbooth, these are all newly purchased books, so they're all lovely and brightly coloured. The next section does not look like that. As you can see, these ones are not quite so colourful. They're very beige, they're very faded, because a lot of them are very well loved paperbacks who I've either had for a very long time or which I bought secondhand. And I'm kind of in the process of replacing my favourite books from this shelf with some newer additions. Flash forward about 7 months into the future, because yes, that is how long ago I filmed that earlier part without putting it up, and this is what this shelf looks like now. It's a little bit different, obviously, much more colourful, less beige, which is basically what I was going for. My original plan was to replace the books that are on the shelf, but actually only 2 of these are replacements for ones that was already there. The Little Princess and The Secret Garden, and the rest of them were just part of the same series. I thought they were gorgeous, and of course they had to all go together on the same shelf. So that's what this shelf looks like now, much prettier in my opinion. Don't fret, I still have all the original books. They're just tucked behind there, keeping nice and safe. And back to the present. So starting at the left, I have How the Whale Became and Other Stories by Ted Hughes. Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. Blinky Bill by Dorothy Wall, which is just an absolute classic. Snugglepot and Cuddlepie by May Gibbs, which is just so iconic. I have a large hardback with full coloured plates down the bottom of the shelf, but I have this little paperback as well because I love this book too much to only have one copy of it. A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett, which I've read literally dozens of times. You can see how well worn this edition is. This story is just absolutely beautiful, but it's significantly more depressing than the film which is based on it. The Enchanted Castle by E. Nesbit. This has such a convoluted and bizarre plot. I can only recall snippets of it, but E. Nesbit is just magical. So I also have The Railway Children by E. Nesbit, which is probably the ugliest cover in my collection. 7 Little Australians by Ethel Turner, which I read this year for the 30-day read. I just adored it, and I definitely cried my eyes out at the end of this book. The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, who also wrote A Little Princess. This one is a completely different story, but I think it's just as wonderful and has its own brand of magic. Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson, and some more E. Nesbit. This one is The Treasure Seekers. Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. I think the book is even more heartbreaking than the movie, and that's something I never thought I would say. The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, which is another contender for ugliest cover in my collection. The Secret of Nim by Robert O'Brien, which I haven't read. And Watership Down by Richard Adams, which I also have not read, which I feel is like some sort of blasphemy for someone who loves children's literature. The next 3 books are all by A.A. Milne. The House at Pooh Corner. Now We Are Six, and this gorgeous vintage hardcover edition of Now We Are Six because I'm a huge sucker and I can't resist a book that has a dedication in it, especially not one from Christmas 1929. After that, there's Tom's Midnight Garden by A. Philippa Pierce, and Mary Poppins by P.L. Travers, which I read for the 30-day read and quite enjoyed. Very different to the movie, but certainly worthy in its own way. This is the last section of my children's literature, and these books are all hardbacks. First off, there's Heidi by Joanna Spyri, the second copy of Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson, because I just love these Dean and Brown hardbacks and I'm a big sucker for the gorgeous illustrated spine, which you totally can't see. And another Dean and Son hardback, this is Tom Brown's School Days. Stacked in the middle here, I have Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. The second book, Good Wives, and over the side here I have Little Men with this adorably cheesy cover. I do have a copy of Joe's Boys, which is the fourth book, but I have no idea where it is at the moment. Back to the middle I have Pollyanna by Eleanor H. Porter, and then I have the Anne series by Ella Montgomery. So that's Anne of Green Gables, Anne of Avonlea, Anne of the Island, Anne of Windy Willows. I am missing Anne's House of Dreams, so I'm hoping to find it in the same adorable 80s hardback that I have most of the rest of the series in. But I do have Anne of Ingleside, which is the last book. And then I have the two sort of spin-off books which feature stories about other people from Anne's town. That's Chronicles of Avonlea with this terribly ripped up and tattered dust jacket, and Further Chronicles of Avonlea. Then on the right there, next to Little Men, I have Mary Rose by J.M. Barrie, which is probably out of focus. Yep. And then Peter Pan and Wendy by J.M. Barrie in this sort of gorgeous cloth-bound soft jacket. I have Captains Courageous by Rudyard Kipling, and Lucky Last, the Jungle Book, obviously also by Rudyard Kipling. So next to my kids set, I have this box, which is just my Alice in Wonderland collection. I actually did a whole video about my collection. I showed off all the covers in that one. So if you wanted to know a little bit more about my Alice collection and why I have so many copies of this one book, I'm going to link on the screen and just down below the link to that video so you can go check that one out. The only copy that I didn't show in this video is this pink Penguin Classics edition. So it's just the popular penguins. Usually these ones are orange, but this one's pink because the profit of it goes to breast cancer research, which is pretty cute. And then just on the end of this row are all of my illustrated works and art books. So starting up the top here is Skulls, an exploration of Alan Dudley's Curious Collection, which was curated by Simon Winchester. Obviously this edition is really beat up and scratched, but I didn't do that, I can promise you. I got this from work when it was already damaged, so I paid like $3.50 for it, which is awesome because inside, if you excuse me, it's just a photo book of all different animal skulls, which is a little bit morbid, but mostly I think it's really, really interesting. Under that is Watchmen, the graphic novel by Alan Moore and David Gibson, which I haven't read yet, but I bought for myself as a graduation present and I'm really excited to start. Hyperbole and a Half by Ellie Brosh, which is a collection of cartoons from her blog, which I definitely recommend if you haven't seen that one yet. Why We Broke Up by Daniel Handler and Mara Kalman, which I really enjoyed. And The Tiny Book of Tiny Stories, curated by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, which I adored. On the left here is the only manga series which I've actually read to completion, and it's a really nerdy one, Return to Labyrinth by Jake Forbes. It's actually based on the Labyrinth movie with David Bowie in it, which is my all-time favourite movie, so even though I'm not usually into manga, I couldn't resist this one. Plus the covers are gorgeous, so that's number 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is my favourite because honestly, look at this cover. The graphic novel adaptation by Neil Clyde and Alex Nino of Jack London's Call of the Wild. And then I have 3 different manga adaptations of different Shakespeare stories. That's Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, and Macbeth. And then the next 2 are manga adaptations of biographies, which I talked about at the beginning of last year. So there's Gandhi, which I thought was a little bit disappointing, and the 14th Dalai Lama, which was just awesome. Hark a Vagrant by Kate Beaton, which is a collection of comics from her website by the same name. The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, adapted by Peter Cooper. And another manga autobiography, this one of Nelson Mandela. Ghost World by Daniel Close, which was really disappointing. The World of the Book by Des Cowley and Claire Williamson, which is gorgeous. I got this one from work as well. And so it's just a collection all about book design, cover design, basically everything that a nerdy book lover is into. The Big Book of Grimm, which is an adaptation of all of Grimm's fairy tales, where each tale is illustrated by a different comic artist in a comic style. Leonardo's Anatomical Drawings, which is a tiny little book, and it does exactly what it says. There's no extra writing in here, no description, it's just his anatomical drawings, and I'm really into anatomy, so I think this is just beautiful. Oh, there's so many penises. The Great Artists and Their Most Important Works by Susie Hodge. The Beatles in Australia, which is a photo book that I got 7 or 8 years ago for my birthday, and is just photos from when the Beatles came to Australia and for some reason left Ringo at home. Poor Ringo, come on. Arthur Spiderwick's Field Guide to the Fantastical World Around You. This is obviously a companion art book to the Spiderwick Chronicles, but when I picked this up, I hadn't heard of the Spiderwick Chronicles and had no idea it was a companion. I guess I didn't read the back particularly well, because it points it out pretty well. And the last one on this shelf is probably my favourite. It's Brian Frown's The Goblins of Labyrinth. As I mentioned with the manga at the start here, Labyrinth is my all-time favourite movie, and to have a book which includes all the art behind the inspiration for all the goblins and all the human characters is just gorgeous. This was really expensive. I think it was $50 or $60, but if you're an uber nerd for the film like I am, it's definitely worth the money.